Hello, YouTube. It looks like we are online. Just take a few moments to let anybody who was trying to join right at the start come in and join. And could say a couple words just about stream business, stream goals before getting started. So, I got some positive feedback about our little notepad Vim thing here. Some people thought that was a cool idea, so good to have some positive feedback on that. Um, yeah, I was thinking myself a little bit about when I might view stuff on YouTube or look at other people's content. How is it? When is it that I do that? How is it that I do that? So, for example, a lot of people listen to podcast type stuff while they're driving or exercising or otherwise doing something else. So, it's kind of like if you were just working in a room and you're overhearing a conversation, and there might even be music or something else going on at the same time. So, just imagine you're in a coffee shop, there's some background music going on, and then maybe a couple people next to you are having a interesting conversation, so you're half listening to that and you're also doing some work on your computer. So one thing that I think I'm going to keep on doing with the stream is like I don't have any fancy background music. The idea here is that actually if you just turn it in on the background and you're maybe you participate in the chat sometimes or um, leave it running while you're cooking your dinner or something, then that's cool. I hope that if I continue to do this and um, I'm thinking about like how people might be listening to this stream. So if you have any feedback on that, how do you usually listen to streams, or have you not really listened to streams? Do you watch gaming streams or anything like Twitch? Do you watch like political stuff? Do you watch a C-SPAN? If a politician says they're going to give an address, do you care to catch that live? I think the last live event I caught was when Mark Zuckerberg revealed his metaverse. So Facebook had made some announcements that they were going to announce a thing, and I tuned into that. I think I was on. I forgot if I was on Facebook itself or if I was on YouTube. Oh, and another one I looked at recently was when Google launched their Pixel phone. That one I believe was advertised on YouTube, but I wanted to see how Google, huge company, they are the people who do YouTube and stuff now. How is it that they try to pull off a live type of event? Another type of live thing on YouTube is you probably have seen all these kind of featured or recommended channels for internet radio type things of all sorts. So there was this famous one. What is it? Well, I'll just go to YouTube. I'll show you some examples. I'm talking about these videos that are primarily music playlist type things. So like, let's just say I search studying music, something like that. Then all these videos are gonna come up. Yeah, so this kind of got famous as a meme. This lo-fi hip-hop radio beats to relax and study to. So I'm gonna mute the sound on that because of copyright, this and that. You don't want to get in trouble. But we're being meta here. You see, we're talking and looking about live streams on a live stream. Who would have thought we'd see this combination in the year 2020? So, oh yeah, they got a poll. Let's close the poll. Okay, and then there's people in all sorts of different languages talking to one another. Do we have Dora the Explorer? Hola, soy Dora. Sunny sad life. I am your friend now. Okay, so hopefully on this stream we get a little bit more cohesive of a conversation going than these sorts of things. But I think sometimes it is interesting to check in on the most high volume, sort of mainstream people that are succeeding in any sort of area in order to sort of gauge the direction of what the cutting edge is. So it seems that these continued streams are probably, let's see, 33,599 people watching now. So this is a huge number of people that are watching. Probably the majority of the people have this music on in the background while they're studying or trying to or pretending to study. And then, I haven't been around this particular server, but or particular channel, but I imagine that there's some regular people that often tune in, and so some of these people are probably recognizing the other people that likewise check in. So about this stream, as I've been saying, one of the goals that I have is that it's a sort of place where you could just go, and if you're going to be online anyways, and you might want to run into some interesting people to talk to, or you want to pass a topic by me so that I could read your comment and hear what you have to say about a particular issue, then I hope by having these streams at least pretty regularly that it could be a good forum for that sort of stuff. So, cool. Alright, we don't need lo-fi beats now. Let us return to the text where we left off. So for those new people that are joining today, starting yesterday we began looking at this book called The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul, published in French 1954, in English in 1964. I guess it took an hour yesterday to actually get started reading the text, because what we did is we went back and we looked at Wikipedia and looked at some background about the author, and saw interesting connections with people such as Aldous Huxley and these British intellectual people. So today I think that we'll just jump into the text. You could watch the previous Allen stream number 4 if you're interested in looking at the background of the author more, and I'll leave it up to you, the audience, if you have anything interesting to say about any of these streams. Just drop a comment, and then on the current stream or a future stream we could respond to the comments that people leave. So let us continue the text, and I will be monitoring the chat as well in case anybody comes in with something to say. Otherwise, as I've been saying, one of the goals of this stream too, for me personally, is if I'm going to be doing something anyways, such as going through some materials, researching some topics, looking at some stuff, then why not do that publicly? Before starting a YouTube, one of the things I enjoyed doing a lot was being a blogger, writing blogs, but it is the year 2021, and you'd be more likely to meet other people and have other people use the social features of a website and so on and so forth if you position yourself on a major platform such as YouTube. So that is why we're here on YouTube, even if got to hold our tongue and be a little bit careful about certain topics. I think that is a price to pay for this very extensive internet infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, that YouTube provides. So let us continue. The majority of investigators in a laboratory are technicians who perform tasks far removed from what is commonly imagined to be scientific work. The research worker is no longer a solitary genius. As Robert Jung says, he works as a member of a team and is willing to give up his freedom of research as well as personal recognition in exchange for the assistance and equipment a great laboratory offers him. These two things are the indispensable conditions without which he can even dream of realizing his projects. Okay, very interesting paragraph right here. So, if anybody has researched the history of science or even a particular technology, so I'll continue to give examples from the scientific field that I've spent the most time in, which is either software engineering type stuff or linguistics. Yeah, we could talk about how the normal sort of establishment path to succeed in these fields is often working in very large groups. Whereas this paragraph here mentions a kind of character. The research worker is no longer a solitary genius. So we could talk about what this solitary genius type, archetype, whatever you want to call it, is. Somebody who's willing to go against convention, to pour all their finances, to go sleepless nights, to do whatever it takes to make scientific discovery. That's a kind of character versus what the author is saying here is that most people who are scientists are not like that solitary genius. Rather, they're people, and the nature of the sort of project that they're working on is they need to be yoked to these very big institutions in some form or another, or they cannot do their work. Let's just talk about a couple of contemporary examples. So, for example, there's this kind of lone hacker archetype of like a person who by themselves on the computer, lone wolf type. It's super smart, knows all this stuff about how software works, and could, governments fear them or whatever because they're super smart. So that would kind of be like your solitary genius sort of person. However, that person, they might have always go by a pseudonym. They might not be able to reveal themselves, and so on and so forth. Whereas, if you're a Google programmer or someone, you're working. Yeah, Google's a good example. Let's say you want to do a lot of research on some expensive hot field. So we'll use quantum computing as an example. Now, it doesn't even matter if you know what quantum computing is or not. We could just look at these images and say, quantum computing involves big computers that you yourself independently could not afford. So to be a pioneering research scientist of some kind working on quantum computing, it's not just going to be you by yourself in your room, probably. Rather, as Jacques Ellul is saying, it's going to be you having to work with other people at somewhere, like Harvard University, and working with other people and being attached to an institution, of course, means responding and adhering to all sorts of rules and restrictions and protocols, whatever it is that the institution says that you have to do in order to be there, right? And there's nothing new about this. For example, like let's say you're really interested in airplanes. Well, by yourself, there's limits to how big a personal aircraft could be and how expensive it could be. But if you just want to fly like the coolest aircraft ever, well, maybe if you follow a career in the military or something, then you'll have better prospects of being able to not only see but also use some of the biggest, coolest tech out there. Alright, we continue. Pure science seems to be yielding its place to an applied science which now and again reaches a brilliant peak from which new technical research becomes possible. Conversely, certain technical modifications in airplanes, for instance, which may seem simple and mechanical, presuppose complex scientific work. The problem of reaching supersonic velocities is one. The considered option of Norbert Wiener is that the younger generation of research workers in the United States consists primarily of technicians who are unable to do research at all without the help of machines, large teams of men, and enormous amounts of money. Okay, so this paragraph seems to be discussing this idea that the nature of a lot of scientific or technological research now means that not only to position yourself professionally, but just the nature of the very things that you're working on means that you're going to have to plug into the institution in order to do it. So, yeah, from my own experience, I'll just say, like, one of the areas of things that I do is web programming. One of the reasons I chose to do web programming as opposed to all sorts of other sorts of things one might do is because I wanted to do work where I would be able to use the tools or the things that I learn basically wherever and whenever I want. So let's say I did something else, like I was some kind of aircraft engineer. Well, it's much harder to keep access to aircraft on hand and be able to always use aircraft as opposed to carrying around a laptop or something. It's nothing fantastic, nothing special. But yeah, a lot of jobs, they involve having to be yoked to lots and lots of establishment stuff in addition to technology. All right, continuing. Okay, but it is not application which characterizes technique, for without technique, previous or concomitant science has no way of existing. If we disown technique, we abandon the domain of science and enter into that of hypothesis and theory. In political economy, despite the recent efforts of economists to distinguish the boundaries between science and economic technique, we shall demonstrate that it is economic technique which forms the very substance of economic thought. All right, so returning to Jacques Ellul's general idea about technique, when he's saying technique, he is meaning something much more general than just how you do something, but a very big system which would subsume a lot of the stuff we call technology. Okay, so I have a comment here. Saw says, Alan, need a bigger headshot, can't see your facial expressions. Alright, is that a lighting issue or is that a screen issue? I will make it bigger. Maybe some people are viewing this on a screen that is smaller. If that is what people want, I will enlarge my face. Order, move up. So I'm moving up. Okay, there I am. Now I'm bigger than my text editor. Let's see if that's workable. Okay, so going back to technique. Right, so science, maybe in the sense of just abstract knowledge, and technique, which is the application of some knowledge to get some sort of efficiency or result. And then this is just characterizing that relationship more. Okay, continuing. The established foundations have indeed been shaken, but the problem of these relations, in view of the enormity of the technical world and the reduction of the scientific, would seem to be an academic problem of interest only to philosophers, speculation without content. Today, it is no longer the frontiers of science which are at issue, but the frontiers of man, and the technical phenomenon is much more significant with regard to the human situation than with regard to the scientific. It is no longer in reference to science that technique must be defined. We need not pursue philosophy of science here, or establish ideally or intellectually what may be the relation between action and science. What we must do is look about us and note certain obvious things which seem to escape the all too intelligent philosophers. Okay, so we see the author here starting to make what you would call normative claims. So normative claims is a claim is a statement that asserts something that could be either... No. Oh, here we go. A normative claim is a claim that asserts that such and such ought to be the case. So we're getting into the realm of what you would call ethics here in philosophy. It's a person not just describing or saying like how things are, trying to make a model that you say is true or false. But the author is starting to say his opinion. So he's saying we need not pursue philosophy of science here, blah, blah, blah. So what he's... And this is kind of weird. We'll talk more about what's going on here, but the author switches from waxing on and off about the meaning of some different concepts to now telling us what we should be doing. Okay, interesting. We'll continue. It is not a question of minimizing the importance of scientific activity, but of recognizing that in fact scientific activity has been superseded by technical activity to such a degree that we can no longer conceive of science without its technical outcome. As Charles Carmichael has observed, the two are closer than ever before. The very fact that technique advances with great rapidity demands a corresponding scientific advance and sets off a general acceleration. Alright. Moreover, techniques are always put to immediate use. The interval which traditionally separates its scientific discovery and its application in everyday life has been progressively shortened. As soon as a discovery is made, a concrete application is sought. Okay, so now it's kind of back to descriptive talk. He's saying that, you know, as the science theories and stuff evolve, that people try to apply that immediately. So I think we could see that as we, like I gave the example of all this quantum computing stuff. Just as people are talking about quantum computing and all this sort of stuff, then you get different companies that are actually trying to build quantum computers and talk about their uses. So just one quick point. In the above few paragraphs, we had this mention about how the nature of how research is done is that, right, the majority of investigators in the laboratory are technicians, blah, blah, blah. So scientific research and stuff isn't a lone solo guy, but it's kind of this establishment supported huge gigantic machine. And then it is talking about techniques being put to immediate use. So there's this description of society and the people that are technicians or science. Well, I'll call them science workers rather than scientists. In this example, all these technical workers are put in this giant machine, and then it's like this giant science machine, the big giant science machine then determines what it is that you will be developing to suck and assume more people into the great science machine. So a pretty grim picture here. We'll see if he has a bigger point behind that. Is he saying that this is inevitable? This is just how it is? But then that's why I brought up like the normative claim stuff earlier, which is when he's saying how stuff should be. So it's saying, okay, here's this very grim picture of how stuff is, and then it seems like there's these normative claims of that indeed is how it should be. So I'm not sure what to make of that. We'll continue. Oh, we have a new person popping in. Reaper. Hello. I gotta type some integers. Reaper. Alright, continuing. The scientist might act more prudently. He might even be afraid to launch his careful, calculated laboratory findings into the world, but how can he resist the pressure of the facts? How can he resist the pressure of money? How is he to resist success, publicity, public acclaim, or the general state of mind which makes technical application the last word? How is he to resist the desire to pursue his research? Such is the dilemma of the researcher today. Either he allows his findings to be technologically applied, or he is forced to break off his research. Oh, okay, so here we're starting to get more explanation and development about why Jacques Ellul is making these normative claims about what people should do. So he's mentioning how a person who wants to be a scientist in the sense of like finding out more stuff, he has all these pressures to not do pure research, but instead to settle to do applied science. Like, why would you study applied mathematics when you could study pure mathematics? What a sad situation it is. So we're starting to see this idea developed. Let's see if it's going in that direction that I expect, or if Jacques Ellul has something else to say. Such is the drama of the atomic physicists who saw that only the laboratories at Los Alamos could provide them with the technical instruments necessary to the continuation of their work. The state then exercises a very real monopoly, and the scientist is obliged to accept its conditions. As one of the atomic scientists put it, what keeps me here is the possibility of using for my work a special microscope which exists nowhere else. Jung. The scientist is no longer able to hold out. Even science, especially the magnificent science of our day, has become an element of technique, a mere means. There we have indeed the final word. Science has become an instrument of technique. Okay, so I want to play with big toys so I could learn more about the world, but the only way I could play with big toys is if I join the establishment. Oh no, the vehicle of scientific discovery I want is an instrument of technique. That seems to be the general dilemma that's laid out here. Yeah, looks like we don't have any comments so far. I have a lot more to say about that topic, but we'll let Mr. Jacques Ellul speak through his text some more, and we could cover some of this stuff with some commentary as we go. Okay. Later we shall consider how it has come about that scientific utilitarianism has gained much momentum from technique, that a disinterested piece of research is no longer possible. It has always been necessary to have a scientific substructure, but today it is scarcely possible to effect a separation between scientific and technical research. Indeed, our omnivorous technique, and this represents in part Einstein's thought, may in the end make science sterile. Okay, we have a comment from Reaper. He says he's not complaining about the establishment or politics. He's referencing institutional scale. Yeah, okay, I think that's fair. Yeah, he's not like whining and complaining. He is describing institutional scale, like you would talk about, like, let's just say building rockets. To build rockets, of course, you need to work with like governments and really big players to do that. I guess where I was reading in some of the sort of complainy tone was, as I was saying earlier, when he started making some sort of normative claims about like how stuff is and what people must do, that sort of thing, where he seemed to be, I don't know. Yeah, I think, yeah. So maybe I was attributing an attitude to the author that is not implied with the text. Okay, Reaper says, and specialty devices and thus technique know-how that are only found at that scale. Yeah, exactly. So if you want to learn about rockets and how they work, then you kind of have to have some deep-pocketed friends or fed friends, because otherwise you're not going to be able to play with rockets. As opposed to, for example, these, like if you're just a hobbyist that's playing with little toy rockets. To come to think of it, like there was like this film I saw as a kid. My father showed me this film. It's called October Sky, I think. Kind of fitting for this season. But I think this film was about like kids who made rockets. Something like that. Anyways, I think that the point I'm trying to make here with this is, for a lot of areas, whether it's computers or like rocket science, I think that one way in which a lot of people get interested and start to do these things is because on a little local scale, they're able to experiment and learn. So they're able to have this scientific discovery experience, and that is what draws them and brings them in. But then in practice, then you'll find that if you want to take your rocket learning to another level, then as Ellul is saying, you'll have to make friends and get involved in certain ways that might be distasteful to the free-spirited scientists. Okay, Reaper says, what's this weird normative claim phrase you keep on using? Yeah, this is a standard philosophical idea. You could be descriptive and say how something is, or you could be normative. So we'll just read the Wikipedia official definition. In many disciplines, including economy, economics, and philosophy, a normative statement expresses a value judgment about the desirability of a situation. Whereas a descriptive statement, also known as a positive statement, is meant to describe the world as it is. A normative statement is meant to talk about the world as it should be. So why would it be relevant to bring this sort of stuff up? When you get a lot of people that, let's just say you're a famous economist or something, I think you could look at some researcher and say, yeah, they make a lot of very astute observations. They're very good at making descriptive statements and offering a useful descriptive framework or something. But then this person mixed in with a lot of what they're saying too, then they might make also a bunch of normative statements, them saying, all right, okay, here's a description of how the world is. Now here's how I would like the world to be. I think this is especially common in particular genres. For example, like books. In books, a lot of times this is where authors and people are not only just describing and telling a story, but also a book is their, soapbox, whatever you want to call it, in which they could talk about how they think that stuff should be. So, yeah, we could even say, what sort of normative claims does Alan make on this stream? And, I think that it's very, very common for people to make value judgments and stuff. So I'm not saying that that's even a bad thing to do, can we be purely descriptive? Or do we always have like a point of view, some sort of normative take on something? I try my best here to not complain. So if it seems like I'm complaining, then that's a good check to me. So thank you, Reaper and other audience members, for saying like, oh yeah, seems like no you. Then that's good. That's good for me to hear. Because we want to be dispassionate, analytic science-minded people here who are able to read even opinionated writing and to unpack and see how stuff is, including, what are the things that people want. I think that you could clearly understand somebody's point of view on stuff as well. Reaper says, is the normative claim phrase a common device in philosophical discussion? Yeah, so I think it is common in the sense that some people will think that they're creating an argument or saying something. They'll think that they're being really smart and proving a point, but then actually they're just making a normative claim. So one group of people that I think a lot of people will be happy to diss on these days is professional economists, okay? So an economist might have all sorts of fancy words and technical language, but at the end of the day, they're saying the world should operate this way, and I'm going to press buttons and pull levers to try to make the world that way. So if you're doing something like that, like, let's just say you're the Federal Reserve or something, does this mean that you're a astute, descriptive observer, all this sort of stuff? Like, yeah, you could be very good at that sort of stuff, but a lot of the rhetoric that you'll hear from people in those sorts of positions is they're just telling you their will to how they want to shape the world and how they see the world. They're like, things should be this way. I should push this button and this should happen, even if that's not actually what's happening. Aha. Okay, hello. We have another person joining. Says streaming late again. Yeah, I guess it's late. It's 4:40 p.m. in California. Care to share the cliff notes with us on the right? Bums me out. I can't stick around for this. Oh yeah, so we got some friends in different time zones. So unfortunately, we cannot always include everybody. I'll try to stream at different times sometimes so that we could include more people. What we're doing right now is we're just looking at this text, the Technological Society, and yeah, basically we're just going through, reading, and talking about what the author's saying and exploring our own biases, assumptions, and learning more about ourselves in the process. So no particular agenda aside from that. Thank you for coming and joining. Oh, another comment from Reaper. He says, I think when economists predict the future, they use their terms to act like astrologers. When they use their terms to describe the past, they are not so bad. But they're acting as historians. Yeah, that's a good point. So we could say hindsight is 2020, right? Where you could pretend to be a big brain because you described the past with all sorts of fancy terms, a coherent, elaborate framework that seems to perfectly be able to explain or make sense of a bunch of things that happened in the past. And then you could try to extrapolate to the future. So yeah, I think Reaper brings up a good point here. Says I think when economists predict the future, so they have all their models and stuff they apply to do a historical analysis. So not science in the sense of like you can't reproduce the past innumerable times, right? You could just sort of gather these different incidents that you cannot repeat because let's just assume that we're not multi-world quantum whatever. We're going to assume that you can't do any of that stuff. And you go forward, okay, then it's a very different sort of analysis to make predictions than it is to describe the past. Okay, cool. Oh, great. We have some more interaction. So hello says, just an observation, not having read this text. The middle paragraph on the page you're on reads like Whiggish history, when reality is less deterministic. All right. I am aware of the conclusions, but the way he reaches them is questionable. Right. Okay, so I think Hello brings up a good point here. And this is one of the reasons I think why it's a useful exercise to read over and actually look at the text of works of literature, works of nonfiction, whatever you want to call them, that have been influential. Because you'll have these works that are, let's just say, they're received as authoritative in some sense. Like, I'll just give an example of something that like I wouldn't even disagree with. So people might say like, Jordan Peterson, right? Jordan Peterson talked about this book, The Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn, and it's like, okay, yeah. So in the Gulag Archipelago, it showed that communism is bad. All right, that's like a very not. There's not much to elaborate, or that statement doesn't say very much descriptively. It's kind of just like, oh yeah, we all know that communism is bad. Okay, so I happen to agree that I think that we shouldn't introduce communist society. I think communism is bad, but that statement itself, just saying that conclusion like that, you miss a whole bunch. But if you see like how that person comes about and says what they say, so for example, actually having been and living in one of those societies and they observed all this sort of stuff, then it's worthwhile to read that rather than just giving this soundbite and saying like, oh yeah, communism is bad. Not to say that communism isn't bad. Yeah. So I'll have to look more at this term. I've heard this. I haven't looked into this term Whig history very much. Whig as in, like, I think British people in the Whig Party in the United States. Yeah, Whig Party history. But that will be another interesting topic we might have to take a deep dive into. The Whig version of history and how that has been promulgated as a, I think, like I've heard people say like our sort of default understanding of a lot of history is basically the Whig version of history. But of course, the Whigs were the only people around in history, and there's a lot of people who have a lot of problems with what it is that the Whigs say about history. Yeah, and Hello also says the Marxist dialectic is similar. Yeah, so we might also have to talk about some of this Marx stuff. I don't think I'm going to read the whole Das Kapital on stream or something like that. I think that would be a good help people fall asleep stream. But, yeah. Interesting. Okay, so I'll just continue going down here. I shall often use the term technique in place of the most commonly used term science, and designate as techniques work that is usually termed scientific. This is due to the close association of technique and science, which I've pointed out and which I shall discuss more fully later on. Okay, so if his distinctions between technique and science haven't become clear, the author anticipates this because he says he's going to elaborate more. I think I have a kind of general sense about the differences that he means, but we'll let him speak for himself. Alright, a new section, organization and technique. A third element will help us formulate our problem more clearly. I have already pointed out that we must understand the term technique in a broader sense. But some authors, not wishing to deviate from traditional linguistic usage, prefer to keep its current meaning and seek another term to designate the phenomena we are describing here. according to Arnold Toynbee, history is divided into 3 periods, and it is on the point of passing from the technical period into the period of organization. I agree with Toynbee that, okay, blah, 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 blah. So, some stuff here, I'm not going to read. I think we could go on. Toynbee, I'm going to assume, is one of his contemporaries. So, he's just talking about how this Toynbee guy has this theory of history, and also he has a sense in which he uses terms like technique and science, and then maybe Jacques Ellul has his reasons for using the terms he does, and so on and so forth. So stuff like this, it could have been extremely interesting to the author of this book, right? But for us, then we only have so much time, so we could talk about other people who are more relevant and how they have used terms like technique and science and what we think about that. Like, for example, on this stream, I have given my own conception of science, which is being able to know and understand cause and effect relationships, and then we could talk about technique. Like the Greek word techni, as a kind of application of like how do you know how to do stuff, basically. So I'm just gonna keep on scrolling until I stop seeing the word Toynbee. If anybody is like, oh no, this discussion of Toynbee is really important, well, then my challenge to you is to go into the chat or into the comments and tell me what is it that I missed about this Toynbee stuff and why we should look at it again. All right, we got some definitions. Let's hear some definitions. Okay. Once we stop identifying technique and machine, the definitions of technique we find are inadequate to the established facts. Marcel Mauss, a sociologist, understands the problem admirably and has given various definitions of technique, some of which are excellent. Okay, I just want to say, going back to this topic of normative, so maybe like more so than this is what you should do, right? We could think of normative as applying a kind of value judgment. So not just saying like, the sun rose at like 6 a.m. today. To say the sun rose at 6 a.m. today and it was excellent, right? Then that adds a sort of value judgment onto the statement that's being made that one might say is like subjective or not scientific or something like that. So here, Jacques Ellul, right, in a book, which is his book, so he's like allowed to do this. We say people they're entitled to their own opinion. Nothing stopping him from doing this. But this is just to say, in a book like this, it's not just neutral non-fiction, right? It's full of a dude and his opinions about stuff. So he says, right, Marcel Mauss, a sociologist, understands the problem admirably, right? So value judgment admirably, and has given various definitions of technique, some of which are excellent. So, to me, this sounds like Jacques Ellul. He wrote this huge, gigantic book about technique. So let's just assume that he's kind of the expert on all the senses in which people have used technique. He is tipping his fedora to this other researcher who has also discussed technique, and he says, right, in his evaluation, being the expert on technique, because he writes over 400-page books on technique, he likes this guy. Okay. Or he likes his analysis, at least. So we'll continue. Let us take one that is open to criticism, and by criticizing it, state our ideas more precisely. Technique is a group of movements of actions, generally and mostly manual, organized, and traditional, all of which unite to reach a known end, for example, physical, chemical, or organic. Okay, so once again, technique here, it's sounding to be like it's not just how do I operate a calculator, but it could also include more broadly like how do I run an accounting firm, right? Because you're organizing groups of movements of a lot of people, and a lot of those actions might be mostly manual. For example, typing on the keyboard, data entry. But in this sense, like things like business operations and the modern organization of corporations, stuff like that, then I think that would fall under technique here. All right. Yeah, so Reaper got a definition from Wikipedia about what technique is. Yeah, dude, I'm all with you. Just giving a definition of technique like this, but instead we're at page 50 over 503 and we're still defining technique. So um, let us continue. Though I do remember, I think that we read this quote, I think from the book already. If that that one is probably the citation one, not a page one, but we shall see. Okay. The definition is perfectly valid for the sociologist who deals with the primitive. It offers, as most shows, numerous advantages. For example, it eliminates from the realm of techniques questions of religion or art. Magic, however, ought to be classified among techniques, as we shall see later. Ooh, interesting. But these advantages apply only in a historical perspective. In the modern perspective, this definition is insufficient. Okay, I think I know where he's going with this, but we'll go on. Can it be said that the technique of elaboration of an economic plan, purely a technical operation, is the result of such movements as Most describes? No particular motion or physical act is involved. An economic plan is purely an intellectual operation, which nevertheless is a technique. All right. We got a couple comments here. Reaper says, quote, that modern society is being dominated by technique, which he defines as a series of means that are established to achieve an end. Technique is ultimately focused on the concept of efficiency. Reaper says, tagging me, this reminds me of the parameterization of society that you were talking about. Were you purposely connecting parameterization to technique? Yeah, so I don't think you were here last stream, but I had made that parameterization stream first. I hadn't looked at this book, and then another user, I think it was Dion, he brought up this technological society book, and then I'm taking a look at it, and yeah, it seems it directly connects, right? So I learned something, right? What I refer to as parameterization of everything, that maybe we could say it's a lot of what Jacques Ellul is talking about as technique. So one of the techniques is the parameterization of everything, right? You turn everything into data that you could crunch and compute, and then from that you could like write computer programs or use machine learning, whatever you want to call it. You could use these things in order to calculate your way to victory. So, right, astute observation by Reaper here, and that's to say that we have independent voices, people coming from different places, but we're all talking about the same sort of thing. It's just this guy's writing from 1954, and then I'm talking about this in 2021 after watching Zuck's Meta launch. So we're all coming and talking about very similar stuff, that we come across it from different times and places in history. Okay, continuing. When we consider Moses' statement that technique is restricted to manual activity, the inadequacy of his definition is even more apparent. Okay, I'm not going to read the rest of this paragraph because this seems like Ellul is just going to be talking about how the reason that he's defining and talking about technique as this more broad thing is because if you restrict it to just manual, like hands and tools, it's inadequate because you could do stuff with your brain, right? What if you could plug your brain into a computer and write C++ code? Oh, look, no hands. I'm coding my computer. Whoa, is that still a technique? So I think that point is clear enough. We could accept that Ellul's definitions here and understanding is more general. All right, another comment for me. Reaper says, sounds like you're claiming a French philosopher invented game mechanics decades before Silicon Valley. Yeah, so this is one of the other big points that we have in looking at old texts like this. We could look at who the different intellectual influences for various people are. So, for example, if we read about some computer programmer that designed some famous game or some famous system, then we could see, like, was he just trying to make a system devised by somebody else and sort of make it in real life? So a kind of humorous, well, not a rather dystopian example that we discussed the other day is this idea of the Panopticon. Actually, I don't think I discussed this on stream, so we could go ahead and discuss this on stream. Might have discussed it on stream. Conversations are running together. Anyway, so there's this idea of the Panopticon. So a type of institutional building and system of control designed by English philosopher and social theorist Jeremy Bentham in the 18th century. So the Panopticon, right, you have the single watchtower in the middle, and then you could have like just one guard, and he peers out and he could see like all these people in their different cells. So, and let's say you don't even have a guard in there, but the people in the different cells know that there could be a guard, so they're totally scared because they don't know if they're being watched or not because they're totally exposed in all their rooms. All right, let's put on our CEO hats, and then let's look at Panopto software. So I don't know if the people who made this software thought it was like cute or funny or something, but it's like this software that's named after the Panopticon, or at least maybe not named after, but it's like making an allusion to the Panopticon. So while you're at your company or a university, you could be subjected to prison style surveillance. Like, I guess that might make sense from an operational standpoint to buy, but don't be evil. Like, I don't know. Anyways, so when we look at where ideas come from and how and why people do stuff, it's interesting. You could say, yeah, so we have the Panopticon as an example. I think it said 19th century Jeremy Bentham. And then you see a modern 20th, 21st century software company that takes this like 19th century idea that it was based on a physical space, and then you bring it into a software reality. In the same way, right, we could look at how other terms or other ideas that people might be talking about in these old books, and then we could look at, you know, like what is like I'm curious, you know, maybe we could take a look. What would Mark Zuckerberg's recommended readings be? Like, he's probably interested in the Snow Crash book. I think people were saying that the that term metaverse or something came from this Snow Crash book. So this Neil Stephenson in 1992. So there's a religious allusion here. He's in the beginning was the command line, and yeah, the snow crash. So snow is like this white screen of death from a Mac snow crash. We could look at an image here. The Mac will just search white screen. So when Mac computers used to stop working, then you might see these like white screen of not working as opposed to the blue screen of death on the Windows PC. Sad face. The computer's sad. Right. So looking at the literature and stuff like that, it could be interesting because if a person explicitly says, like a technology leader, like Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey or whoever, if they say that they're explicitly influenced by such and such particular work, you go ahead and you read that work and what it's about, then you might actually get a better idea about what are the things that these people are trying to build and why. We have a comment. Hello says, okay, in terms of business decision and policy making, there is the Mcnamara Fallacy, which is relevant to this conversation. I think the author is one level above that, though, questioning the precepts of organizations, I think. I have no doubt they are. So I think that's talking about knowingly creating something like Panopto, alluding to what they're doing. Same with the unironic embrace of the Wolf of Wall Street by finance bros. It's like they only watch the first half and totally misunderstand the movie. We think of it as creepy and oppressive thing, but at the same time it was introduced, it was done with good intent. Similar to Malthusianism, which many decry today. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not going to try to read intent into people if they don't, like, outright just announce their intent for stuff. But yeah, I think this Wolf of Wall Street is a funny example. Like, somebody, same thing too with like gang violence and stuff. Like, for example, a movie I was shown as a kid was this film, Boys in the Hood, you know, and I think it was, I might have been listening to some rap music or, you know, being a little punk, and then my parents showed me this movie, Boys in the Hood, which among other things shows how gang culture and stuff it basically just, it leads nowhere good. Gang culture, it might be glorified, pumped up as, you know, oh, cool music, a lot of money, excitement, all this sort of stuff. But it ain't no fairy tale, you know. Boys in the Hood. It ain't no fairy tale. So, but, you know, what if I saw Boys in the Hood and I just watched like part of it, or I even watched the whole thing but, you know, ignored some parts of it, and instead it turned to me as like an inspiration of like, oh yeah, being one of these gang guys, that sounds like a cool thing to do. So in the same way, maybe Wolf of Wall Street is like the kind of white collar version of Boys in the Hood. Yeah. Yeah, Hello brings up another example about I live with low level gangsters. Yeah, I mean, I'll give you just one more funny example. Funny slash sad example. It's like there's this Grand Theft Auto game that was modeled after Los Angeles. And okay, so they call it Los Santos instead of Los Angeles, like Vinewood instead of Hollywood. So obviously they're making allusions to actual Los Angeles. Anyways, around the time that this game was released, I was actually in the city of Los Angeles, and you could walk around town, and it was like, you know, the ghetto in a lot of places, like poor, crime-ridden areas, a lot of trouble going on. And then there would be these giant billboards and murals and stuff advertising this Grand Theft Auto game in Los Angeles. So it's like, what are you guys trying to do? Are you trying to tell people that, like, stealing cars in this city is cool, and then marketing that idea, but it's okay if it's in a video game? Like, there's a lot of things to unpack there. But yeah, I think we've all converged on this interesting conversation topic here about how through our entertainment and our media, sometimes stuff gets shown and and then people kind of take and use those ideas. So what is the relationship between showing stuff? Should you not even like play games like Grand Theft Auto? Should you not look at it? Um, I'm not sure. Yeah, let me know. I would say that you probably shouldn't be playing like Grand Theft Auto if you have other things to take care of, like, if you're neglecting car maintenance, maybe actually go fix your car instead of playing GTA. I don't know. You guys could let me know what you think about that. All right, so it's talking about Mose and his definition. Let's skip some paragraphs and just start reading a paragraph once we don't see discussion of this guy Mose anymore. All right, then he's further examples of inadequate definitions are those supplied by Jean Forestier. Okay. So it seems that Jacques Ellul is very pleased with his own definitions of technique, about how he is adequately general and broad, inclusive, whatever you want to call it, with his definition. We don't need to see how he criticizes the specifics of how other people describe it. Okay, here I just saw the word UNESCO. That caught my attention. Let's start here on this paragraph. This tendency to reduce the technical problem to the dimensions of the technique of production is also present in the works of so enlightened a scholar as Georges Friedman. In his introduction to the UNESCO Colloquium on Technique, he appears to start out with a very broad definition, but in his second paragraph, without warning, he begins to reduce everything to the level of economic production. Okay, so this sounds like Jacques Ellul is just continuing on his idea where his definitions of technique and science and this other things, he's been much more broad in scope, where it's like not just economic production, but maybe techniques of management and organization. This would all fall under Ellul's definition of technique. But other people who have written on this topic have constrained themselves and have talked about technique in a much narrower sense. And then Ellul just has to justify why he is talking about technique as a more broad thing. All right. Okay. Hey, some in the chat, could somebody offer a definition or copy paste something about what this Mcnamara effect is? I've of course heard the name Mcnamara, but I'm not entirely familiar with what you guys mean by Mcnamara effect. Okay, let's start with this paragraph. There is another element in this scientific attitude, only that is knowable which is expressed, or at least can be expressed in numbers. To get away from the so-called arbitrary and subjective, to escape ethical or literary judgments, which, as everyone knows, the trivial and unfounded, the scientist must get back to numbers. What, after all, can one hope to deduce from the purely qualitative statements that the worker is fatigued? Okay, so this relates directly back to my parameterization of everything talk, where I talked about this difference between qualitative versus quantitative research generally, which basically means quantitative is people counting stuff. So Jacques Ellul is talking about how scientists like quantitative research, whereas a example of qualitative research that he offers is to say, the worker is fatigued. Then you might go and speak with the worker, and the worker might tell you reasons why he is fatigued. For example, the worker might say, oh yeah, I could work hard for a couple hours, but if I'm doing the same thing, then I get bored. But if I switch up tasks, I could actually work for 4 hours straight. Now, if you aren't taking into account like a more complete explanation, or like qualitative, doing more qualitative analysis, whereby you give the worker freedom to say stuff like that, and you're only looking at parameters like, oh yeah, how long could workers work? Okay, 2 hours, right? But you don't have a model that could say, oh yeah, this worker said he could actually work 4 hours, but what's important is that he's able to switch tasks so he doesn't get bored. Um, there you see how the quantitative reasoning, looking at quantitative stuff alone, could blind you from some very useful information that might actually make your factory more efficient. So I think, yeah, Ellul is saying that it's it's like an error to be overly number obsessed, maybe. Yeah, the scientific position frequently consists of denying the existence of whatever does not belong to the current scientific method. Yeah, so that seems like a valid point to me. Okay, so we have a definition of the Mcnamara Fallacy. Reaper quotes Wikipedia. Also known as the quantitative fallacy. Defense from 1961 to 1968 involves making a decision based solely on quantitative observation and ignoring all others. The reason given is often that these other observations cannot be proven. Robert McNamara was a Secretary of State during Vietnam and a believer in, quote, scientific policy, unquote. He advocated the body count strategy where success was measured by insurgents killed. He was warned by his staff that the Vietnamese people weren't taken well to Americans. He asked if his subordinate could measure that. He didn't, so McNamara said, it's not worth considering. Okay, so maybe Secretary of Defense. I don't know. Okay, so just hearing this, like, that just sounds like a bad idea to me. Like, you only look at a certain number, but maybe, really smart, powerful people in the United States government truly adapt to certain like, I don't know what to make of it. It's just on face value, it's like sounds dumb, but I guess sounds dumb doesn't mean that people won't do something, and maybe sounds dumb is a form of haters gonna hate. So thanks for finding that definition, though. That's an interesting thread to perhaps look into more. Right, back to the text. Let's see what else is going on here. Okay, so yeah, another researcher defining technique. And then paragraphs where Ellul is talking about how probably this guy's definition falls short of his. Okay, more about what technique means. Some more citations of other people. When André Leroy-Grand tabulates the efficiency of Zulu swords and arrows in terms of the most up-to-date knowledge of weaponry, he is doing work that is obviously different from that of the swordsmith of Bechuanaland, who created the form of the sword. The swordsmith's choice of form was unconscious and spontaneous, although it can now be justified by numerical calculations. Such calculations had no place whatever in the technical operation he performed, but reason did inevitably enter into the process because man spontaneously imitates nature in its activities. Accomplishments that merely copy nature, however, have no future. For instance, the imitation of birds' wings from Icarus to Ader. Reason makes it possible to produce objects in terms of certain features, certain abstract requirements, and this in turn leads not to the imitation of nature, but to ways of technique. Okay, this paragraph is kind of interesting because now he's talking about how technique, and this might be extending a little bit beyond what the actual text says, but it's saying like humans are special and that they make technique that isn't just copying nature, but some of the creative aspect or the what makes technique a thing, right? It's not just instinct, but doing something beyond that to make stuff like airplanes, which don't have flapping wings. All right, comment from Reaper. This and Jack Welch's, former CEO of GE, saying, "You can't manage what you can't measure," are cornerstones of all modern management, to the extent one might want to blame modern management. On various things, this way of looking at the world is one of the main problems, and also for government. The problem is when themes of accountability gain momentum, it means everything not measured is not accounted for. And then some examples: happiness, well-being of your populace, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so going back to this that term I made up, parameterization of everything, and then people give only a second thought to externalities, and they might only look at externalities if they get sued or get in trouble. Oh look, we're gonna go to the IMF website. Let's go straight to the establishment to learn about externalities. That sounds very educational. All right. Thomas Helbling. Externalities. Prices do not capture all costs. There are differences between private returns or costs and the costs or returns to society as a whole. Consumption, production, and investment decisions of individuals, households, and firms often affect people not directly involved in the transactions. So we could look at, like, on a financial level about how somebody might make particular transactions to optimize a certain metric, such as profit, right? So I buy this type of bread or whatever because it's cheapest, and I could sell the sandwich at this price, and so on and so forth. But in doing that sort of thing, then if you're just looking mainly about what are the options I choose to maximize price, then all sorts of other stuff might happen as a consequence of what you do. Sometimes these indirect effects are tiny, but when they are large, they can become problematic, what economists call externalities. Externalities are among the main reasons governments intervene in the economic sphere. Most externalities fall into the category of so-called technical externalities. That is, the indirect effects have an impact on the consumption and production opportunities of others, but the price of the product does not take those externalities into account. As a result, there are differences between private returns or costs and the returns or costs to society as a whole. Yeah, I think so. These ideas here, externalities, and these examples that Reaper and Hello had brought up about management and what you're taking into account, then this all generally relates to this problem of calculation in general. So if you get people who are developing technique, and you could say they're trying to improve their technique in some sense, but the way in which they're doing it is based off things that are quantifiable, then you're going to run into all sorts of problems because let's just say peace of mind is something that's not quantifiable. So that's an assumption I'm going to make. Like, peace of mind is something that's not quantifiable. Then no matter what metrics and stuff you're able to machine learning your way and optimize for and all sorts of stuff like that, if you're trying to go for a goal that isn't quantifiable, such as peace of mind, or peace of mind for maximum people, whatever you want to call it, it will simply be impossible to do because you can't account for that which is unquantifiable if you're using a quantity quantifying driven approach to do something, because you can't see the target that you're optimizing for. So you could try to approximate it in all sorts of ways. Like you might say, we can't actually quantify peace of mind, But let's define peace of mind as, I don't know, the comments to reaction ratio on Facebook. So if people are writing a lot of comments and not reacting a lot, maybe that means that people are being cerebral. So rather than being controlled by their emotions, they're being reflective and thinking. Therefore, that will show that they have more peace of mind. Okay, so someone might come up with some idea like that, and then suppose you optimize for that, and then you find that Facebook is then full of people who are just doing like various like crazy rants and stuff, and they aren't reacting because they're just posting on their own walls and just saying stuff. Okay, so did you succeed in maximizing peace of mind of other people, like just from an external outsider point of view? A lot of people would say no. I don't think that that's the case, and so that would be an example of how this quantifying approach might fail. You try to approximate something that's not quantifiable with some other metric, and then you optimize for that metric, and then lo and behold, what happens? Well, you've created a new problem or sort of transformed an existing problem rather than fixing anything. Let's see. Cool. So no additional comments so far. I think I will continue with the text. But yes, thank you for your comments, everybody. And we are bringing a lot of stimulating topics of discussion to the stream today. Okay. The intervention of rational judgment in the technical operation has important consequences. Man becomes aware that it is possible to find new and different means. Reason upsets pragmatic traditions and creates new operational methods and new tools. It examines rationally the possibilities of more extensive and less rigid experimentation. Reason in these ways multiplies technical operations to a high degree of diversity, but it also operates in the opposite direction. It considers results and takes account of the fixed end of the technique, efficiency. It notes what every means devised is capable of accomplishing and selects from the various means at its disposal with a view to securing the ones that are the most efficient, the best adapted to the desired end. Thus, the multiplicity of means is reduced to one, the most efficient. And here, reason appears clearly in the guise of technique. All right. Hello, Oz. Comment. Interesting to mention. What follows from this is that a mostly positivist approach is mainly harmful when used in policy making. Good for analysis, but a little narrow to base society on. Yeah, with respect to like the positive approach or quantifying stuff, like I think for a lot of things, nobody would disagree that if with the consent of the people involved, to measure or take quantity, it's not a bad thing. Like if I go to a store and somebody is like, oh, did you know that the store counts all the cartons of milk that's sold and the eggs that are sold? Did you know that? Like, they're calculating. It's like, well, I mean, this is kind of what you should expect, because in order to run the store and to know about, the quantities of stuff that people are demanding, so they could put in an order to get an appropriate amount of, these goods and so on and so forth, that there's nothing strange or unusual about that, because the thing that you're counting is a obviously countable thing. It's like a unit of milk, a liter of milk, whatever you're talking about. Now, where this sort of stuff gets kind of fishy and difficult is like these examples that you all are offering, is when people try to quantify something like happiness or well-being in your populace, something like that, then people will try to quantify that in all sorts of different ways, and the policies that people implement by doing that based on an efficiency goal as opposed to something else. For example, like an alternative to that would be, let's just say, like the United States Constitution limited government. So instead of like using government to optimize to give people certain stuff, let's say you had a government and its sort of operating principles were limiting and checking powers of various aspects of the government, such that nobody could impose on anyone too much. Okay, so that's two sorts of different policies. One sort of policy, you might be just optimizing and trying to get something like economic growth, even if it means, let's just say, the legislative branch gets super powerful. But by doing that, they could optimize like GDP or something. Then you might reject that sort of approach just because you choose to run a policy of like limits on power. So it's like, even if that would give that result, you don't do it because there's like a ethical reason or some other reason why you don't do it. So yeah, once again, for a lot of these questions that people talk about, sort of how meaningful or important to you it might be will be depend on like which switches of power do you have. So everybody, for instance, everybody has some degree of agency over controlling like their body, how they interact with the people around them, and stuff like that. So insofar as when you learn about economics and things like that, it could be influential and help you to make more informed decisions about where you put your money and stuff like that, what jobs you work, and so on and so forth. Then it could be useful. But then on the other hand, right, there's no point in me getting super angry about the Federal Reserve or something, because they're going to have their policies whether I like it or not. Now, that being said, when we're reading a work like looking at Jacques Ellul, The Technological Society, I think it is valuable to say, all right, so we have people running governments and stuff, and they're doing things like this Mcnamara Fallacy. We see this sort of stuff in action. People are developing software called Panopto, right? These are facts that you could see. People actually do take ideas that are expressed in works like the Technological Society, and they presumably understanding the implications, or at least some of the implications of what they're doing, they go ahead and they decide to roll out stuff in a particular way. I think that some of the value of studying works like the Technological Society, what we're doing here today, is if you could see and understand, you could have the science of how it works, then, it could be useful for deciding how you navigate what's going on. Okay, so how much more do we have in this chapter? All right, let's continue until this historical development heading, and then we'll call it a day. In addition, there is the intervention of consciousness. Consciousness shows clearly and to everybody the advantages of technique and what it can accomplish. The technician takes stock of alternative possibilities. The immediate result is that he seeks to apply the new methods in fields which traditionally had been left to chance, pragmatism, and instinct. The intervention of consciousness creates a rapid and far-flung extension of technique. Okay, so this just sounds like it's like this example of the airplane, right? The airplane, doesn't just copy the flapping wings of a bird, but by thinking about stuff like an Elon Musk language, you might say, by taking a look at first principles, this became a kind of popular thing in recent times. And working on refining and developing your technique, then you're able to become, more powerful than nature could have possibly imagined. Ah ha 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 ha. That's what's being expressed here. The intervention of consciousness causes a rapid and far-flung extension of technique. The twofold intervention of reason and consciousness in the technical world, which produces the technical phenomenon, can be described as the quest of the one best means in every field. And this one best means is, in fact, the technical means. It is the aggregate of these means that produces technical civilization. The technical phenomenon is the main preoccupation of our time. In every field, men seek to find the most efficient method, but our investigations have reached a limit. It is no longer the best relative means which counts as compared to other means also in use. The choice is less and less a subjective one among several means which are potentially applicable. It is really a question of finding the best means in the absolute sense on the basis of numerical calculation. Okay. It is then a specialist who chooses the means. He is able to carry out the calculations and demonstrate the superiority of the means chosen over all others. Thus, a science of means comes into being, a science of techniques progressively elaborated. The science extends to greatly diverse areas, it ranges from the act of shaving to the act of organizing the landing in Normandy, or to cremating thousands of deportees. Today, no human activity escapes this technical imperative. There is a technique of organization. The great fact of organization described by Toynbee fits very well into this conception of the technical phenomenon, just as there is a technique of friendship and a technique of swimming. Under the circumstances, it is easy to see how far we are from confusing technique and machine. And if we examine the broad areas where this search for means is taking place, we find three principal subdivisions of modern technique, in addition to the mechanical, which is the most conspicuous, but which I shall not discuss because it is so well known, and to the forms of intellectual technique, card indices, libraries, and so on. All right. Oh, we have a comment from Hello. I read that as reinforcing earlier the earlier idea about the drive to optimize everything, e.g. fitness is a recent phenomenon. In the past, people didn't think a lot about what they are or how they move. Yeah, so here there was this, one of the things we just read too long ago, which is talking about like technique has its aim to find like the best method, something like that. I think another way to phrase that, like what I was doing with the parameterization of everything talk, was talking about optimization of some word. I think that's Latin. Like optimum means like best. Optimum. Optimum cable brand. Of course. Okay, let's go straight to Wikipedia instead of searching a word, because then we might just get advertisements for various products. That was pretty funny. Yeah, optimum. Right, from New Latin, neuter of Latin, optimus, best, very good. Right, so the like optimum technique, the best technique. Jacques Ellul is talking about a search for the best technique, and one other way to phrase that would be searching for what is the thing that we optimize for a particular field, whether that's running a particular government branch or producing crops or whatever. You're looking for the best. What is that optimum? What is the thing you're optimizing? Okay. So reason, and then I link that to that idea of Elon Musk and the first principles as a modern manifestation of how that idea has been rebranded, however you want to phrase that. See, in addition, there's the intervention of consciousness. Consciousness shows clearly and to everybody the advantages of technique and what it can accomplish. The technician takes stock of alternative possibilities. The immediate result is that he seeks to apply the new methods in fields which traditionally had been left to chance, pragmatism, and instinct. Oh, I think I read that. I was like scrolling up. Or repeated. Okay, well, we'll just continue from here. The twofold intervention of reason and consciousness in the technical world, which produces the technical phenomenon, can be described as the quest of one best means in every field. One best means is in fact the technical means. It is the aggregate of these means that produce technical civilization. Okay, so I did read this stuff. We'll just go down a bit. Oh yeah, so we were at this point where he was talking about the three principal subdivisions of modern technique. So let's see what these three things are. Oh, we got a comment from Hello. Do I see more of these activities being moved from leisure or thoughtlessness to being part of a bigger system in our minds? For example, I will work out 30 minutes each morning to be more successful. This habit can be found in a lot of billionaire habits lists you find online. It's actually about a return and not the activity in of itself. Yeah, Hello, you make a good point here. So once again, I'll bring up a thing we talked about earlier on a different stream of hustle culture, which many people will regard as toxic, because you might say, like, instead of just enjoying going for a jog in a park, now you got all these like hustle culture bros hustling, going around. It's like, it's not just about, running or lifting weights at the gym. It's about like not just me and my personal best, but like me winning at a game, at some kind of optimization things. So a lot of times when people get ambitious, they want to start to work hard, apply effort to win at particular metrics. And then yes, so like, let's look at this thumbnail here. It looks like it's a YouTube video. This idea of productivity, right? This let's look at their little blurb here. Is it possible to take your productivity and work habits too far? What happens if you push it to the absolute limit? Sometimes you got to slow to go fast. Knowing how to take care of your body and so on and so forth, right? So people could take these ideas of optimization and apply them to extremes, and then in doing so, they might start to do damage to themselves. It looked like, I didn't watch that video, but it seemed like their answer was, you can't optimize for the short term. You have to optimize for the long term. Basically, you have to slow down to go fast over a long term. It sounds like a sort of rephrasing of the same thing. It's just making the scope longer. Instead of how do I make $1 billion in a month, it could be like, how do I arrange my life so that I could get a certain sorts of returns that I want. So maybe they have not escaped that treadmill or that way of thinking with that video, but I did not watch the video, so you could find that video and watch it for yourself if that interests you. Alright, back to Jacques. Okay, 3 techniques. Economic technique is almost entirely subordinated to production and ranges from organization of labor to economic planning. This technique differs from the others in its object and goal, but its problems are the same as those of all other technical activities. Okay, the technique of organization concerns great masses and applies not only to commercial or industrial affairs of magnitude, coming consequently under the jurisdiction of economic, but also to states and to administration and police power. This organizational technique is also applied to warfare and ensures the power of an army at least as much as its weapons. Everything in the legal field also depends on organizational technique. So politics and military, you could say that they're kind of similar. Like libertarian talking point I heard was you could say a government is whoever has a monopoly on the use of force. So government, military, police, these are the people that are allowed to kick in your door. Like they're allowed to, you could talk about in what sense that is meant, but they're able to apply force. So technique of organization, maybe this is talking mostly about money. Economic technique is talking mostly about money. Then technique of organization is talking about application of force. And then let's look at this. Human technique takes various forms ranging all the way from medicine and genetics to propaganda. Pedagogical technique, vocational guidance, publicity, etc. Here man himself becomes the object of technique. Okay, so then what's described here is human technique is things you could do to influence and make people go one way or another. So we have money, force, and here I'm gonna make a little leap and say kind of like a lot of this will be emotional type stuff. So whether using like fear or nostalgia or whatever it is that you use to appeal to people, these are all techniques you could develop. I mean, you could create metrics and find out actions you do in these realms in order to optimize whatever you want to do. Okay. Almost done. We observe in the case of each of these subdivisions that the subordinate techniques may be very different in kind and not necessarily similar to one another as techniques. They have the same goal and preoccupation, however, and are thus related. The three subdivisions show the wide extent of the technical phenomenon. In fact, nothing at all escapes technique today. There is no field where technique is not dominant. This is easy to say and is scarcely surprising. We are so habituated to machines that there seems to be nothing left to discover. Has the fact of technique no intrinsic importance? Does it spring merely from the march of time? Or does it represent a problem peculiar to our times? Our discussion of the biology of technique will bring us face to face with this question. But first, we must survey in detail the vast field which the technical phenomenon covers in order to become fully cognizant of what it signifies. Alright, so today we said a lot of words, looking at Jacques Ellul and what he has to say about what he means by technique. And we related it to some current topics and some past streams we had here. And yeah, it seems this book was a very relevant recommendation from Dion, who unfortunately doesn't seem is able to make it today. But 1950s, 1960s book that is directly related to these topics of Mark Zuckerberg, what he's trying to do with the metaverse, and maybe we could go off the script, off the book a little bit, and talk about how some of these technological developments and stuff that we're seeing today, how is it that they are applications or optimization exercises, whatever you want to call it. Let's analyze those things under Ellul's framework of what a technique is. That could be something that we try to do a different time. Maybe next stream. So, examples of technique in a little sense. And then one thing we could do is we could look at contemporary examples of this. So if anybody finds something particularly interesting, YouTube video, news source, whatever it might be, feel free to send it to me, leave it in the comments. Otherwise, I'm sure that I will stumble across stuff, and I will continue to link and show stuff on the screen about ideas that relate. So for example, one thing that I brought up on this stream was Ellul was talking about rationality, and one example is like the airplane. It doesn't have flapping wings, so that's an example of applying a certain sort of thinking to make a solution that isn't simply a copy, but involves like a scientific understanding to develop a more efficient technique, right? And then I said, oh, yeah, that actually sounds very similar to what the business bros are saying today. And this example, it was Elon Musk and this hype about first principles thinking. A quote, which is sometimes called reasoning from first principles, is one of the most effective strategies you can employ for breaking down complicated problems and generating original solutions. The airplane, once again, being an example of an original solution because it's not just copying birds. It might be the single best approach to learn how to think for yourself. All right, some people that did it, blah, 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 blah. Right. A first principle is a basic assumption that cannot be deduced any further. So once again, going back to logic, deductive reasoning, all these things. That's to say, applying this first principles thinking, this rationality, all this stuff. What does that mean? Well, it means you understand clearly who are you, what are the things that you assume that are true, what is it that you believe, and then once you go from that, then you could sort of reason from the ground up and come up with original solution. So not disagreeing with the idea of first principles thinking, what that means. Now we can look more closely at what are the first principles that a lot of different famous people and stuff presuppose, and we could talk about whether or not we think that they're justified and not with believing that the first principles that they hold to be true are indeed true or not. That will be more topics for further times. Cool. So I think we'll close up for today. Just read a couple more comments. Hello says, great stuff, stayed all the way through till the end. Hope the off topic wasn't a bother. And then, we had this mention of the Monty Hall problem or trick, so we might have to look into this. And also, let's add that to future topics. We have intuition and probability. I'm actually going to put these as two separate topics. Intuition, and I'm going to add to this the problem of induction. So this is like inductive versus deductive reasoning. And we could talk about how that's related to probability, intuition, these things above, because these are some very big general mathematical formulations of this idea of prediction generally. So optimizing prediction, all these topics come together in terms of the technique as a, like, what are the actions that you do based on first principles or whatever. All of it all comes together. So we'll be talking more about these things. Anyways, Reaper says, why not add Nash equilibrium? All right, I'll add that. I don't quite remember what that's about all too well, though I remember the name Nash. Famous math guy, probability guy. Okay, cool. Thanks everyone for joining, and I hope you have the rest of the night. Rest up well. And I will try to do a good job announcing ahead of time when my next stream will be, so that you could all join. And feel free to bring your friends, bring people you like to argue with on the internet, And I'll just say, as sort of stream business news, my plan is to always keep this stream like PG related. Of course, we might talk about these big brain philosophical topics and stuff, and like we had mentions of the Vietnam War and stuff like that, but I'm not gonna cuss, not gonna insult or flame any groups, nothing like that. We're here to all come together to have a polite discussion and to learn stuff. So I hope to see everybody who joined around more later, and then also feel free to bring along others. It'd be great to hear from more voices. Thanks everyone for joining.